The night I saw her again, everything I thought I'd buried came rushing back, sharp, undeniable, alive. Some stories don't start with words. They start with a look you were never supposed to return. Before we move on, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that 99% of you watch but don't subscribe. If you're here, feeling this story the way I do, don't just scroll past. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. Let's make this more than just a story. Let's make it a conversation. The night I crossed the line, the air felt heavier than usual, like the world itself knew I was about to lose something sacred. I remember the silence more than anything. It wasn't the kind that soothes. It was the kind that waits, that listens, that dares you to keep going. And I did. I went further than I ever thought I could. All because of her, my cousin. The one person who should have never been more than family. If you've ever felt the pull of a forbidden connection, something that defied logic but still consumed your every breath, stay with me. Stories like this aren't easy to tell, but they remind us how fragile desire and morality can be. Subscribe, share, and listen closely. Because what I'm about to confess is not about love or betrayal alone. It's about how one moment can twist your entire sense of who you are. I still remember the sound of gravel under the tires as I turned into the old driveway. That soft crunch that always felt like the start of summer. But this time, it didn't feel like a beginning. The air was heavier, the kind that carries old dust and old ghosts. The house by the river stood exactly where it always had, slouched slightly to one side, its wooden bones weary but proud. The paint had peeled into pale curls, like the house was shedding a past it no longer wanted to keep. I parked and sat there for a while, watching the wind move through the trees, trying to remember what coming home was supposed to feel like. Aria was waiting on the porch. I almost didn't recognize her. Time had sculpted her face into something sharper, quieter, like the laughter that used to spill from her had been folded away somewhere deep. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes, and when she said my name, it felt like she was testing how it still sounded. I stepped out of the car, trying to keep my voice steady, pretending that my heart wasn't trying to climb its way out of my chest. Inside, everything smelled the same: lavender polish, coffee, the faint musk of river air creeping through open windows. My aunt had gone to stay with friends for a few weeks, Aria told me, so it was just us. Two cousins, alone again after years apart. It should have felt innocent. It didn't. There was something in the quiet that followed her words, something that moved beneath the surface like the dark water outside. Unseen. But there. The first night, I couldn't sleep. I heard her moving in the room down the hall, pacing slowly, the floorboards groaning under her steps. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks like constellations. The house had always made sounds, the soft hum of pipes, the river breathing just beyond the walls. But that night, everything felt amplified. I heard her laugh softly once, maybe at a message on her phone, and that single sound cut through the dark like a match being struck. The days passed gently, deceptively so. We fell into old rhythms. Morning coffee, river walks, idle conversations about everything and nothing. She told me about her work, about how she felt trapped in her own life. A job she didn't love, a man she couldn't leave, dreams that had withered quietly while she was busy surviving. I listened, and something inside me ached for her, for the girl she used to be. But that ache was dangerous. It had no place here. One evening, we sat by the riverbank, watching the sky bleed into dusk. The air smelled like wet earth and lilac. She leaned back on her hands, her hair catching the last light like fire. I told her the river hadn't changed, that it still sounded the same as when we were kids. She smiled faintly and said, "No, it's us who changed. The river just watched." Her words lingered long after the sun disappeared. We sat there in silence, but it wasn't peaceful. It was thick with something unspoken, the kind of silence that hums, alive and waiting. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't look at me. She just said, "Don't stay up too late." And for a moment, I almost believed we were still who we used to be. But that night, I dreamed of her. I dreamed of her standing in the river, the water up to her waist, looking back at me with that same unreadable smile. When I woke, my hands were trembling. I could still feel the cool ripple of the current around my legs, even though I hadn't left my bed. By the fourth day, something in the air had shifted. She brushed past me in the kitchen, her shoulder grazing mine, and it felt like a small spark caught between us. Quick, invisible, but real. She apologized softly, but her eyes didn't. I mumbled something back, pretending to laugh it off, but my chest was a storm. That evening, I found her in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting through old photo albums. The lamplight flickered against her skin, soft and golden. She looked up when I walked in and said, "Do you ever miss before?" "Before what?" I asked, though I already knew. Before everything got complicated. I sat beside her. The photos smelled like dust and summer. In one, we were children, soaked from the river, her hand on my shoulder, both of us grinning, sunblind and free. I wanted to tell her I missed it every day, that I wished time would fold and take us back. But I didn't. I just nodded, because sometimes words make things too real. Later, as I stood at my bedroom window, I saw her outside, standing near the river, barefoot in the grass. The moon painted her in silver, the water whispering at her feet. For a moment, it felt like I was looking at a ghost, not because she was gone, but because she was too alive, too vivid against the dark. I wanted to go to her. I didn't. Instead, I stayed by the window, watching the river pull at the light, and wondered when exactly the line between memory and desire had blurred. Somewhere between her laughter and that look in her eyes, something had changed, and I was too afraid to name it. By the time I closed the curtains, I knew that the house by the river wasn't a place of peace anymore. It was a waiting room for something I didn't yet understand, something that would soon demand to be faced. And deep down, I already knew I would let it. There are moments that split your life cleanly in two, the before and the after. For me, that moment came on a night so quiet it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. The air was warm, heavy with river mist. Arya and I had stayed up talking, our words wandering from memory to confession, our laughter thinning into something else, softer, almost trembling. The lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and somewhere in that blur of stories and silence, she reached for my hand. It wasn't bold. It wasn't even intentional. Her fingers brushed mine like an accident, but neither of us pulled away. The contact was small, barely there, yet it burned. I could feel her pulse through her skin, quick and uncertain. I remember the way she looked at me. Not like family, not like a cousin, but like someone searching for permission. I didn't give it. I just didn't stop her. I told myself it was nothing. A moment of weakness, a misunderstanding. But that lie didn't last the night. Because later, when I went to my room, she followed. No words, no plan, just that same quiet gravity pulling us closer. The door closed behind her, and for a long time we said nothing. The rain had started outside, tapping softly against the window, a rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. When she stepped closer, I could smell her. The faint scent of lavender and river air, something that belonged to every summer we'd ever shared. My voice broke when I whispered her name. She smiled like she'd already decided to forgive me for it. And when her lips touched mine, everything else in the world stopped existing. There was no morality, no bloodline, no memory, just heat and silence and the awful beauty of surrender. Afterward, we sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floor, breathing like strangers who had just met for the first time. She said, "We shouldn't have," and I nodded. But when she turned to leave, I caught her wrist, not to stop her, but because I couldn't bear the space she was about to leave behind. Her eyes met mine again, and in that moment, guilt and longing shared the same face. The next morning, we acted like nothing had happened. Breakfast was quiet, filled with the clinking of spoons and the hum of the fridge. She avoided my gaze and I avoided hers. Yet every movement, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the way she tucked it behind her ear, pulled me back into that night. I told myself to forget. I told myself to be normal. But forgetting is never an act of will. It's an act of mercy, and mercy wasn't something the world was giving us anymore. Days turned into weeks. Our secret grew roots, invisible but deep. We never spoke about what happened, but we lived inside it. A glance across the table could start a fire. A brush of her hand could ruin an entire afternoon. Once, she left her scarf on my chair, and I kept it hidden for days, as if it were proof that something forbidden had chosen me. I hated myself for that. It became harder to lie. Not to others, to ourselves. My aunt called once, asking if everything was fine. I told her yes, that the house was peaceful, that Arya was doing well. My voice sounded steady, almost cheerful. I don't know how she didn't hear the tremor underneath, the sound of a truth breaking quietly. One evening, Arya asked me if I believed in fate. I said I didn't know. She smiled, eyes dim in the fading light, and said, "Maybe some mistakes are meant to happen." I wanted to argue, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I reached out and touched her hand again, because maybe she was right. Maybe some mistakes were too beautiful to refuse, even if they came with a lifetime's price. We started to steal moments in plain sight, lingering too long in doorways, whispering too closely in kitchens. The thrill was addictive, dangerous, alive. But with every stolen touch came a colder truth. The more we tried to hide, the more the lie began to consume us. It changed the air between us, thickening it, filling it with unspoken fear. We were both waiting for something. For someone to find out, or for one of us to finally stop. Neither of us did. One night, as thunder rolled over the river, she said she couldn't do it anymore. I thought she meant us, but she meant the pretending. "It's killing me," she whispered. "Every time I see you, it feels like I'm holding my breath." I told her I felt the same, that maybe we could find a way to make it right. But even as I said it, I knew there was no right left. There was only what had already been done. She cried that night, quietly, with her face buried against my chest. I held her, hating myself for the comfort I offered. Because deep down, I understood what she didn't say, that this love, or whatever it was, couldn't survive the daylight. It was something that lived in the dark, fed by secrecy and guilt. The rain outside didn't stop until morning, and when I looked at her asleep beside me, a strange calm settled over me. I realized I wasn't afraid of being caught anymore. I was afraid of what would happen when the truth finally came for us. Not the exposure, but the silence that would follow after everything burned away. That's the thing about lies. You don't just tell them, you start to live inside them. And before long, you can't remember what part of you was ever true, and by then, we were already too deep to ever come back clean. It happened quietly, like most disasters do. There was no warning, no sudden crash, just a slow unraveling of the threads we'd been pretending were still holding. Looking back, I think the house knew before we did. It had started to sound different, every creak longer, every whisper of wind colder. The walls that once held our laughter now echoed with something brittle. The river outside had grown restless, its current louder, angrier. I used to believe silence was safety. Now I understood it was the sound guilt makes when it settles in. The first crack came from my aunt. She arrived early from her trip, unannounced. I still remember the sound of her car pulling into the drive, a noise that made my stomach twist. Arya and I froze. The kitchen was still full of evidence, though not the kind you could see. The way we stood too close. The way her eyes darted to mine. Even the air between us betrayed something. My aunt noticed immediately. She was the kind of woman who read silence better than words. That night, she asked me to stay for dinner. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were searching. Arya barely spoke. Every sentence felt like a test. When my aunt finally asked how long I was planning to stay, I said I hadn't decided. She smiled thinly and said, "Sometimes, staying too long in one place can make you forget where you belong." It wasn't a warning. It was a verdict disguised as kindness. After that night, the tension became unbearable. Arya avoided her mother's gaze, retreating into her room for hours. I tried to help, but everything I said made it worse. The house felt smaller by the day, the rooms closing in like walls of confession. My aunt didn't confront us directly. She didn't have to. Her silence was enough to make us crumble. The breaking point came on a rainy afternoon. I was in the kitchen when I heard voices down the hall, Arya and her mother, sharp and trembling. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The tone said everything. Then I heard my name. Once, twice, I froze. Arya's voice cracked, then fell into silence. The next sound was a door slamming. When I stepped into the hall, she was gone. My aunt stood by the window, her back to me. "I thought I raised her better," she said quietly. I didn't respond. My throat felt full of stones. She turned, and the look in her eyes was something I'll never forget. Not anger, not disgust, but disappointment so deep it hollowed me out. "You should leave," she said. Just that, no shouting, no tears. Only the soft cruelty of a truth long understood. I packed that night. Arya came to my door once, eyes red, hands trembling. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I wanted to reach for her, to promise something. But what was left to promise? The world outside was wet and dark, the river swollen and wild. When I stepped out into the rain, she followed me to the porch. "You don't have to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the storm. "Yes, I do," I said. "It's already done." Her hand reached for mine, but I stepped back. If I touched her again, I wouldn't leave, and leaving was the only right thing left to do. She cried then, not loud, not desperate, just small, exhausted tears that made no sound as they mixed with the rain. I wanted to tell her I loved her, but I didn't know if that word belonged to what we had. Maybe love had never been the right name for it. Maybe it was something darker, something that only looked like love because we were both too lonely to tell the difference. The last thing she said to me was, "You'll forget me." I shook my head, though I already knew she was wrong. Forgetting is mercy, and we'd both lost the right to mercy the moment we crossed that line. I drove through the night, the wipers dragging across the windshield, the headlights carving tunnels through sheets of rain. I kept seeing her face reflected in the glass, pale, trembling, framed by the house that had once been our world. Every mile felt like punishment. By dawn, I had no tears left, only silence. But silence doesn't mean peace. It's just the echo of what you refuse to face. Weeks passed. I tried to return to my old life. Work, friends, routine. But everything felt staged. The world moved forward, but I didn't. I'd wake in the middle of the night to the sound of phantom rain, the ghost of her touch still lingering on my skin. I told myself time would heal it, but time doesn't heal what you don't let go of. It just hides it better. Then one day a letter came. No return address, no signature. Just a few lines written in her hand. The river still sounds the same, but I don't. Maybe it never forgives. Maybe we were never meant to. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I never opened again. Because some words aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to haunt. And from that day on, I understood. Secrets don't stay buried. They stay alive, whispering through the walls of every life they've touched. The house by the river was gone from my reach, but it lived inside me. Its silence, its storm, and the one mistake that would echo for the rest of my days. I left, but a part of me never did. It stayed there with her, in the shadow of that house, watching the water move, waiting for something that would never come. Years passed before I went back. I told myself I was only passing through, that it was coincidence, that I didn't even remember the turnoff to that road. But the truth was simpler and crueler. I had never really left. The river had been calling me in quiet ways all along, in the sound of rain against my window, in the way certain evenings tasted like memory, in the dreams where I could still smell her perfume mixed with the damp breath of the woods. I wasn't going there to see the house. I was going to see the ghost of who I used to be. The drive felt longer this time. The trees were taller, Their roots cracked through the pavement like the earth itself was trying to swallow the past. When I finally reached the bend in the road, I saw it. The house by the river, sagging a little more, the paint nearly gone. The porch rail was broken, the windows clouded with dust. It didn't look abandoned. It looked relieved to finally be left alone. I stepped out of the car and stood there, listening. The river was louder now, swollen with years of storms, carrying pieces of branches, leaves, maybe even pieces of time itself. The air was damp, thick with the smell of moss and decay. Each step I took toward the porch felt like trespassing, but there was no one left to stop me. The door gave way under my hand, creaking open with a sigh, as if it recognized me. Inside, everything had been stripped bare. No furniture, no laughter, no traces of the life that once filled it. Only the faint stains where the sun had once touched the walls. I walked through each room, remembering the ghosts that lived there. The kitchen where she used to hum while waiting for the kettle. The hallway where our hands brushed for the first time. The stairs where I had stood the night her mother told me to leave. Each memory rose like dust, hanging in the air, visible only for a moment before fading again. I stopped in the room that used to be hers. The window was cracked open, and through it I could hear the river breathing. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice, soft, uncertain, saying my name the way she used to. But when I opened my eyes, there was only the wind, whispering through the curtains. I walked down to the riverbank. The water shimmered under the pale light, dark and restless. The same current that had watched us all those summers ago still flowed, unchanged, unbothered by everything it had witnessed. I crouched down, touched the surface, and felt the cold bite through my fingers. Time had moved on, but the river remembered. It always remembers. I thought about her then, where she might be, whether she ever forgave herself, or me. Maybe she moved away, built a life that didn't carry our shadow. Or maybe she stayed nearby, unable to leave the echo of what we'd done. I'll never know. But I like to believe she found peace. Someone had to. The sun began to set, turning the water into a molten ribbon of gold and blood. I watched it, feeling something inside me loosen. Not forgiveness, not relief, just acceptance. I had spent years trying to make sense of what happened, trying to rewrite it in my head until it hurt less. But standing there, I finally understood that some stories don't need sense. They just need to be carried, quietly, carefully, until you can set them down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the letter she'd sent me all those years ago. The paper was worn, the ink faded, but her words were still there. I read them one last time, then folded it and placed it on the water. The river caught it gently, pulling it downstream, spinning it once before swallowing it whole. As it disappeared, I whispered, "I remember," and I meant it. I turned to leave, but I didn't look back. The house would stay, and so would the river, and maybe that was enough. Some ghosts don't want to be chased. They just want to be acknowledged. The air was cooling now, the first stars trembling awake above the trees. As I walked away, I realized I no longer felt the weight of what we did, only the ache of what we were. People say, time heals. They're wrong. Time doesn't heal. It erases, it reshapes. But the river keeps everything. It holds your sins, your secrets, your softer moments, and lets them drift endlessly beneath the surface. Never gone, never forgiven, just waiting. And maybe that's what love really is, after all. Not the purity they promise, not the safety we crave, but the endless, quiet current that takes a piece of you and carries it somewhere you'll never find again. The night closed around me as I reached the car. I started the engine, and in the rearview mirror, I saw the house disappear into darkness, swallowed by the trees. I drove away without music, without thought. Just the sound of tires against wet earth and the faint hum of the river following me. And even now, when I dream, I hear it. That same low whisper through the willows. That eternal murmur of water against stone. The river doesn't forget. It never has. And neither do I.